I want to bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard covering the White House. NBC's Ryan Riley covers the Justice Department. Reed Galen is an independent political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. With me in studio, co-host of the Weeknight on MSNBC and former chief spokesperson for Vice President Harris, Symone Sanders-Townsend. Symone, if you're working at the White House and a story like this drops, it clearly has made your boss, the President of the United States, upset. Does there need to be more of a strategy than deny, deny, deny? It's not like something is a surprise here in the sense of just yesterday when the White House press secretary was before the press, in 1 hour she was asked about Epstein 9 times.
Yeah, it is a focus of interest, not just of the people who support the president, but also the press, because the way the president is acting is eliciting more questions
Democrats
and answers.
who have
And
made
Democrats.
a big, yeah.
And now there's talk about congressional inquiries and whatnot. So look, when you're working in the White House and a story like this drops, it is important to note that the Wall Street Journal went to the White House and asked for comment, so much so that in their own reporting, they note that they spoke to the president. That means that when the inquiry came, someone went to tell the president, and he must have decided that it was incumbent upon him to get on the phone directly with the Wall Street Journal. And one could argue that's a good strategy, because it's not a spokesperson saying, oh, well, this isn't that. It's the president of the United States himself, the subject of the inquiry, weighing in. Here's the issue. We never, in this entire debacle, as I'm going to call it now, we have never heard about the underlying facts here. Epstein's crimes were real, okay? They were real. The victims were real. He was arrested and convicted in 2019. Before his trial could start, he died by suicide in jail. But his crimes were very real, so much so that there is another person currently sitting in jail for those crimes awaiting trial.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell. But so we've never heard anything about that. No remorse for the victims, for what Epstein has done. The president never spoke to any of those things. He also, he tries to thread his needle very carefully. And it seems to me that they ran a playbook that they ran before. You get the president on the phone, he denies, and then threatens to sue. There are some outlets that would have had that conversation with the president and said, okay, gone back to legal and said, maybe we don't want to touch this. The Wall Street Journal seemed very confident in what they had, because it seems as though in their own reporting they say it, they had people from the Justice Department who reviewed these. They had all this evidence behind it. So by the time this comes out, when you're the White House, you have really one option. The president's comments speak for themselves. Yeah. That is what you have to say. It is not sufficient, in my opinion, for all of these other political pieces we've talked about, Democrats on Capitol Hill, his supporters across the country who do care about this story, because Jeffrey Epstein is the perfect symbol for that so-called war on elites that the MAGA base has really amplified over the last 10 years.
So, Ryan, when the president talks about getting all the pertinent grand jury testimony released, do we even know what kind of information might be in it? Are we looking at a scenario where even if it did come out, it's a whole lot of redactions? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think redactions would be part of this. But I mean, critically here, the grand jury, what there was seek an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein. So you're going to have the focus being on Jeffrey Epstein, and sort of all of these, any other names I don't think are really going to be the core here, because that was what they came in there to do, was to seek that indictment. That's what the prosecutors were there to do. That's what the FBI agents who may have testified there. So I don't think we're going to get into this notion that there's more of a list. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a safe bet to sort of, feed the beast, I think, in a lot of ways, that there's this big demand for new information about Epstein, and putting out those grand jury transcripts is probably a little bit of a safe bet there, going through this court process, because it's not going to go into details or give sort of all of the evidence over. It's just going to be solely what was focused on, what that grand jury was focused on, what prosecutors were focused on during that grand jury, which is getting an indictment and proving that there is probable cause to get that indictment for Jeffrey Epstein. So it's a sort of a narrower category. It's not just all the evidence being dumped out there, but it is very unusual for Chris, for the sort of grand jury information to come out. It's not the standard process that we've seen.
Not standard at all. So, Reed, even if it does get released, and that is a big if, is this going to give the MAGA crowd what they're looking for, given what we just heard? It doesn't sound like it's going to answer the 2 key questions that much of MAGA world has wanted answered. Did he indeed commit suicide? And number 2, is there a client list?
Right. And I think, to Symone's point, this is really foundational to the MAGA myth that there were a group of people who have been consistently trafficking children. They were Democrats, right? This is the other part, too, is that this is almost a supernatural fight, Chris. And here's, I think, the biggest problem and why the MAGA base is now having sort of mass cognitive dissonance. This is Donald Trump covering up for the deep state, excuse me. And that means, you know what, to them, he's just like every other politician. He's holding up for Bilderberg and Davos and the Trilateral Commission. And, you know, he doesn't want to release the truth behind Comet Ping Pong and all of the other insanity that we've seen over the years. And I think this is a moment where Trump feels very shaky because, again, he was always supposed to be different. He was always supposed to be the one who was going to peel back the onion and say, these people were as bad as you thought they were. Of course, the three of us, the four of us, the five of us all know he's been this bad, right? This isn't any surprise, you know, whether or not it's a birthday card or whatever it is. So like now the MAGA base has to say, OK, what are we going to do? Now, look, is he going to leave office? He's not. But this does have political implications, which is a lot of these people were not particularly politically involved until Donald Trump came on the scene. And the worst thing that can happen for him is that they just bleed back into the woods.
So, Vaughn, this letter that the Wall Street Journal says was attributed to Donald Trump, a bunch of people wrote them apparently. It was given in a book to Jeffrey Epstein on his 50th birthday. It includes, according to the Journal, a drawing of a naked woman, including Trump's signature, and a typewritten message that starts with a line that says, "There must be more to life than having everything," and ends with, quote, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." The Journal says the documents were examined by people who investigated Epstein and Maxwell, but we should note they've not been confirmed by NBC News. So what have we heard from the president on this? What more do we know?
Right. Our fellow news organization decided to go forward with this story despite 48 hours before publishing the president of the United States articulating that he would move forward with a lawsuit if they were to, in fact, publish it. I think that that says something in itself. Inside of the Wall Street Journal story, the president's denial is strong. I'll read it to you. In the interview with the Journal on Tuesday evening, Trump denied writing the letter or drawing the picture. Quote, "This is not me. This is a fake thing. It's a fake Wall Street Journal story," he said. "I never wrote a picture in my life. I don't draw pictures of women," he said. "It's not my language. It's not my words." The president has a deep history of denying allegations of sexual misconduct and denying, frankly, stories that put him into a bad light. And some of this has been echoed, I think it's important to note, by allies of his. Example, Alex Jones was on Steve Bannon's podcast yesterday and was suggesting that James Comey and other intel community officials were planting this type of material to make Trump look bad inside of the Epstein files, and that is why a special counsel is needed to wade through what is real and what is not real. I think, though, when you look at the president and the lawsuit that he is now threatening to put forward against the Wall Street Journal, he's directly calling out Rupert Murdoch. He had one this morning. He also had a post last night in which he says there, the Wall Street Journal printed a fake letter, supposedly to Epstein. "These are not my words, not the way I talk. I don't draw pictures. I told Rupert Murdoch it was a scam, that he shouldn't print this fake story, but he did, and now I'm going to sue his bleep off, and that of his third-rate newspaper. Thank you for your attention to this matter." If the president were to actually intend to bring this to court, there would be depositions that would be a part of that lawsuit. And I think it would call into question the president and the extent to which he would be willing to even take the stand as part of a deposition himself. So I think that there's a lot that stems from this. Of course, the president is somebody who even suggested when the FBI executed that search warrant on his Mar-a-Lago estate in 2022, he had suggested that they had planted documents there. So the president, again, has a deep history of not only denial, but also suggesting wrongdoing that he does not back up with actual evidence and is never ultimately provide credence to those claims that he makes.
So, Reed, I find it interesting that a number of Trump's top allies from MAGA world and beyond, from J.D. Vance, Charlie Kirk, Laura Loomer, came quickly to the president's defense, calling this letter a fake. I wonder if, at least in some level, this reporting managed to do what the president hasn't been able to do, which is find some common ground for the president and his base. I mean, he has gone a far way with his base feeling he has been put upon. On the other hand, it's his base now that are the people who are going after him.
Yeah, and look, this is the leader principle, right? The MAGA doesn't have an ideology really of its own. It is whatever Donald Trump wants it to be at that given moment. The Epstein piece of this, or at least this latest piece, was so different because when the memo from Pam Bondi came out, remember that all of those same talking heads that you just mentioned started screaming about Pam Bondi and how she had done this. Not that Donald Trump had ordered her to do it, but that she had done it. And the Dan Bongino, deputy director of the FBI, was so mad that he was thinking about quitting, right? Because he spent years talking about this. There's a clip of Theo Vaughn and J.D. Vance laughing about how they got to release the list last year. And so now what you're seeing is the president and the White House calling on all of those talking heads, all of those MAGA supporters and spokespeople, say, get back in line. Get back in line right now, right? This is all a hoax. And Rupert Murdoch has always hated Donald Trump. He's part of the deep state. He's part of the people, the grown-up summer camp in Sun Valley, Idaho, and all the other stuff. And so the Wall Street Journal gives them the foil they're looking for. Whether or not the MAGA faithful will fall for it is another story, right? Again, this was foundational to their belief in this whole movement. And so I think that what you're seeing is that they are desperately trying to get everybody back in line, back on the same page, and time will tell whether or not it works.